daughter and some other people that were trying to tell me the life I was living wasn't very good, and I had no interest in it. But when that event came around, it changed my mind, and I said, okay, well, let's find out. Is what these people telling me, is any of that true? So that's what I got.
Yeah, and I think that there's a point in the whole, I'll call it rejection process, where maybe a question gets asked, why are you resisting this?
Mm-hmm.
Because the reason is that people are holding on to something in their lives. Maybe it's a sin issue, probably a sin issue. Maybe it's just as simple as they've heard a little bit about the gospel message, and they don't like this Lord thing. You know, they don't want a commanding officer. Mm-hmm. And, you know, probably one of the most outrageous, if you will, claims of Jesus in the Bible, Matthew 28:18, is all authority under heaven and earth has been given to me. Now that's either true or it's not true, and that's a reality-defining fact. And so, you know, this is where I think, you know, we start maybe backing off the apologetics thing and moving into, is there something going on with you where you are so resistant to this and the logic of this? Mm-hmm. And maybe you don't even get an answer, but maybe we get somebody starting to think about it.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure that you were ready at the time, but maybe 5 years earlier you wouldn't have been ready.
I wasn't ready, no. I wasn't.
But I think unless we approach these things, how would we know? I mean, we've got to bring it out to even know where the person's coming from.
Why, what's, that, some Christian at some point, which unfortunately we do, some Christian at some point treats you poorly, and you saw that, well, if he's a Christian, I don't want anything to do with him or her. Try to find out where does this all lie? Why is it you're so resistant to it? Or even people that are somewhat ready, where do you stand? What maybe people that have been going to church like Jay was, going for such a long time, I don't know, who knows? God knows for salvation all the time. But maybe people have been attending church, their parents made them do it, they're still there, and you ask them if they were born again, they give you a look like, what are you talking about? Like Nicodemus did to Jesus, right? There's something that's standing in the way, and it's important to try to find that out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, why don't I read Luke?
Sure.
Luke 7 here. And John, calling two of his disciples to him, said to them, Jesus saying, "Are you the coming one, or should we look for, or should we expect another?" When the men had come to him, they said, "John the Baptist has sent us to you, saying, 'Are you the coming one, or do we look for another?' And that very hour he cured many of infirmities or illnesses, afflictions, and evil spirits, and to many blind he gave sight. Jesus answered and said to them, 'Go and tell John the things you have seen and heard, that the blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have the gospel preached to them.'" So, what's standing out to you there?
Jesus is giving these guys that came from John, Jesus is giving them a show, saying, John's having trouble. He's not in a very good place. He's about ready to have his head chopped off, but he wants to know. And Jesus didn't just tell him, leave what you've seen. Jesus went out and did these things right in front of their eyes so they could see him. Jesus wanted them to believe. He wanted, just like he did with Thomas. That's me, doubting Thomas. At least I was then. I'm not anymore, but I was then. And Jesus came to Thomas, and he also, in a way, came to John too, because he wanted John not to have any doubts. And I think he wants us to not have any doubts. think that's what's going on here, is that Jesus showed those two guys that John the Baptist sent to him, he showed them in no uncertain terms he was Messiah. And he did this because that's what the Messiah was gonna do. Read the Old Testament, that's exactly what Messiah is gonna do, with those very things. John was well aware, hadn't read the only testament they had that time, was the Old Testament. And he knew what that meant. He said those things are exactly what the Messiah was gonna do. I think he was trying to give them something they could visualize right in front of their eyes.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, I researched, I've gone at this several times now. Where are the books, the older, non-biblical writings that dispute the miracles of Jesus? Now, these things came up in the mid-1800s. Actually, it was first kind of started in the late 1700s, but really went apace in the mid-1850s, around the time of Darwinism. And I could not find any writings. I looked and looked and did all this searching. Finally, this ChatGPT comes along, and boy, I just jumped all over this thing. And the only thing that, at that time, and maybe it'd be a different answer today, came up with was a book written in the 200s, Origin versus Celsus. And I actually got the book, it's very thick, and I've read through part of it. Essentially, what it is Origen was one of the original Christian apologists. He was asked to write this Celsus. We don't have actually what Celsus wrote. We only have quotes in the Origen book about what Celsus said. So the only thing that ChatGPT could come up with was these Celsus quotes in this Origen book, but they don't actually dispute the fact of the miracles or the resurrection. Celsus' take is it was sorcery. So even going with, you know, an AI search on this thing, if somebody can find something, please bring it to my attention, but I literally have been trying to find something, anything. Why is that important? Because the Gospels and other early Christian writings speak directly to these miracles. They speak directly to the resurrection. Nobody disputed it. And you would think the Talmud would at least do that, or some other significant Jewish writing. I mean, here they crucified Jesus. They kept wanting to kill Paul, right? I mean, they were so frothing over this thing. Surely somebody would have said, hey, these Christians. I mean, I look at what went on in Jerusalem with all these thousands of men coming to Christ right in Jerusalem. Where is the writing that says these people are just following something that never happened? And the reason I believe that there is no writing is because they all knew it happened. And if we look at the Gospels, he was curing people all over Judea as far as Syria. You know, his fame that spread throughout the whole region. And people were not disputing that. And they didn't dispute it until many, many centuries later, based on what? Nothing, no evidence, just based on, I refuse to believe in the supernatural, therefore that didn't happen. Right, can't be true.
I see it like the things that happen with Jesus, and like you said, there's the Jewish Talmud doesn't say anything about Jesus didn't exist. They could never produce the body. That's all they had to do. When Jesus was crucified, and they wanted to do it in the worst way, the worst possible way, they wanted that body. Because Jesus told everybody he's going to rise not spiritually, physically rise from the dead. Spiritually rise from the dead, how can you prove that? Right? You can't prove that. But if he physically rose from the dead, now it's something you can see with your own two eyes. And what all the Jews had to do, Jewish leadership, not the regular people, because I think they believed him and loved him, but all they had to do was produce the body. And we wouldn't be sitting here talking right now. Couldn't do it. And the whole manuscript evidence, I think that's really super important. Now, here's something that I try to pass along to someone. I said, okay, these miracles that happen, these are events. People getting risen from people. Lazarus, he rose him from the dead, and the priests were there, saw it, and many believed when it happened. And the other thing Jesus did, walking on water, creating water from wine, all these things he did if those were written down in a book and somebody could come and say, you know, I was at that wedding, that's a bunch of nonsense, we had old wine that didn't taste very good, and the party blew up because we never left. You don't find anything anywhere about that. But put it into our times. The book came out right now, and that's about the time frame where some of the books came out. John a little bit later, but if a book came out right now claiming that John Kennedy was assassinated on the front lawn of the White House with a bow and arrow, how far would that book get? Do you suppose some writings would be available in just about every newspaper around saying, what are you talking about? We know darn well he was shot in Dallas with a sniper's rifle. Where is this book coming from? My point is that if a book came out right now, we would think it's some buffoon wrote it, right? But nobody said that at the time. When the New Testament scriptures are being spread, there wasn't anybody debating it. And like Jay said, the Jewish lawyers challenged another time. There was challenging a guy named Polycarp. He was a disciple of John. And Polycarp complained because the Jewish lawyers were assigning the miracles that he did to sorcery. There's an interesting aspect to that. They didn't say the miracles didn't happen. They agreed that the miracles did happen because it was close. It was within 50 or 60 years of those events. So many people saw them. They couldn't come out and say, well, those things never happened. Because there were so many people right there, what are you talking about? We saw it happen with our own eyes. So we don't have any of that. That's what Jay's saying across. We don't have any of that documented evidence that Jesus was just a myth. Not until the 1800s, when I think the German textual critics came out. That was when this all started to be doubted. 18 years after the fact.
Right.
Yeah. So let's see, let me pick up here with Acts 19. And Paul went into the synagogue and spoke boldly for 3 months, reasoning and persuading concerning the things of the kingdom of God. But when some were hardened and did not believe, but spoke evil of the way before the multitude, he departed from them and withdrew the disciples, reasoning daily in the school of Tyrannus, this continued for 2 years, so that all who dwelt in Asia heard the word of the Lord, both Jews and Greeks. I think that's a very important verse. What do you think, Jay?
Well, I think it touches on a couple of things. One is that we come from a basis of reason, but it also points to what you'd said earlier about this persuasion thing. I mean, here's our guy who, I mean, I think it's beyond question, Paul was very instrumental in leading many to faith, and he was persuading. He was using persuasion methodology, and so when we, for example, look at a book like Cold Case Christianity, this is a persuasive writing. This is a writing taking evidence and reasoning with it. And so I think when we start in on that, that's kind of the early part of what Wallace is getting into, which is we need to separate out logic and reason from these mere possibilities. And as he accurately points out, you know, when you're in these jury trials, and some of you may have served on a jury, you're given instructions by the judge. And these instructions make very clear that we're not just out on fanciful notions or things that are not backed up by the evidence. And in fact, we're supposed to use reason in evaluating the evidence. And so if it's that important in, say, a criminal case to do that, how important is that when it's somebody's eternal soul? And that's a question that I think can be put to another person. Because really, when you get right down to it, there's evidence, and then there's what they call the standard of proof. What measuring rod are you going to use to evaluate the evidence. And I'm sure some of you have heard this. If there's any possible explanation other than God, I'm not going to believe God. Well, that's not how we send people to the gas chamber. We, or not, or find them not guilty. We apply a beyond a reasonable doubt. And so one of the reasons that personally for me, I have the courage of my convictions is I've looked at the evidence, I've applied reason, I've set a standard of proof as beyond a reasonable doubt, and personally believe it's way beyond just a mere beyond a reasonable doubt. That if I can have a doubter understand that they need to be applying reason to the situation and think about it in those terms. Because after all, who wants to be unreasonable? Nobody wants to be unreasonable, but yet that's what we're confronting up here. That's what we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. The one that sticks out with me is like reasoning and persuading. That sticks out to me as well. Persuading, that's what evangelism is persuading people that their eternal destiny lies somewhere. When you pass away, you're gonna step into eternity. I had a funeral for my brother-in-law here recently, and I hadn't talked to him in an awful long time. I sent him a bunch of books that I read so he could read them. But the last time I talked to him, which was a long time ago, he was an atheist. So I sent him a bunch of books to read, him and my sister both, but he passed away here recently. And I didn't know anything about him, and the few people that I did ask, it didn't sound like anything changed. And that was really sad to me, because my brother-in-law was a nice guy. He may not have known God. I don't know. God knows that, I don't. But he told me he didn't. But he took care of his family very well. He was a nice guy. He's a master sergeant in the Marine Corps, and he tried his best to raise his family. The daughters weren't even his daughters. They were his stepkids, but he took them in as his daughters and did his best. And when I was doing that funeral, there was something that Pastor Bob gave me, like a checklist. And one of them was, when did Lee was his name, when did he come to believe, when was he born again? My sister was in horrible shape. She was crying, because they've been together for 35 or 40 years. She didn't know what to do. I couldn't ask her that question. I just couldn't bring myself to ask her, because I was suspicious that he had. Now, like I said, God's the one that knows that. But it's really nice to know when you're doing a funeral that they did. They believe in God, and then you're still going to miss the person, but you know where they're at, right? They've stepped into eternity. And everybody's going to step into eternity. And it's just which side you're going to step on, right? And those type of things I'm sad that I didn't know, but it also gave me motivation, because I see that somebody who's very close to me, I didn't know. I don't know where he went. I was hoping, I still hoping. Nothing I can do about it now. This idea of praying for people that already left is silly, because that decision's already been made. But that's motivation for me, is that when you know someone that's relatively close to you, it's, and they don't know, for me, that gives me passion to try to get them to understand what's going on. So, that may not apply much to the question, but.
Well, I think it can apply to somebody that we know and somebody maybe we don't know. If we understand that this person in front of us, that their eternal destiny's there, and we believe that, yeah, why not? Why not? We should be attempting to persuade.
Yeah.
For sure. All right, Acts 18, 27 to 28. And when he, speaking of Paul, desired to cross to Achaia, the brethren spoke, exhorting the disciples to receive him. And when he arrived, he helped those who had believed through grace, for he vigorously refuted the Jews publicly, showing from the scriptures that Jesus is the Christ. Now, I know you've had experience with this.
It's an interesting one. Vigorously disputing. Or vigorously refuting. So, as you read this, I mean, it's kind of the same line that we've been going down so far, but it does show that Paul, and for that matter, so did John the Baptist. John the Baptist was up front with people. He got in their face and talked to them about God. And he was, he had some not very kind words to the Pharisees that would dispute. And actually, if you read the Gospels, Jesus did too. He called them whitewashed sepulchres. Not only do you get to heaven, you could prevent others from going there as well. So, is this the same tact you're going to take with everybody? No, there's probably not a lot of people that you have to take that tact, but some are. Some are going to confront you with things like what Paul was being confronted with. And the Jews weren't just confronting him, the Jewish leadership wasn't just confronting him with his words, or that they wanted to tell him how wrong he was. They wanted to kill him. They were definitely in the idea of killing him, because he used to be on their side, and now he realized the truth, and they didn't like that one little bit. But you know what? Paul didn't back off. Paul went to them and tried to get them to believe, and I don't think it was because Paul was prideful. I think it was because Paul cared about them. Paul cared about these people, because the ones that he's talking about here, he may have known them. He went through school with Calamio. Some of these same people may have been in school with him. And he cared about them, even though they were apparently resisting pretty vigorously. But he still cared about them enough to try to get them to understand. I don't know when it comes to the point where you say, okay, I've had enough, I've told you what you need to hear. That's up to you. God will tell you, but does me. For people I witnessed to him, they're just being obstinate and the rest of it. Finally say, okay, well, God's asking me to say what I have to say, and that's it. And I think Paul came to that. He came to the point where he was at this place, he was trying to get them to believe, but he came to the point where Paul said, okay. It's like, I take the example of Pharaoh in Exodus, and God, in the first 6 of the things that he was doing right in front of Pharaoh's eyes, he tried to get Pharaoh. That's what I think he was trying to get Pharaoh to do. But on the 7th one, he finally said, okay, I've shown you enough. And now I don't know exactly how he puts it, but he says, I'm going to cover your eyes now. You've seen enough. That's a scary thought to me.
Yeah.
That is a scary thought, because God actually will say, okay, I've told you enough. You've had enough examples. You've seen people that have changed. I've got out of drug addicts. Ed talks about it here all the time. That there's, I think, 3 or 4 members of the congregation here that have escaped heroin. When he tells that to people that are in the heroin escaping business, they're stunned, because people don't get off heroin. But he's got 4 of them that are here that did get off of it. So I think it's just a matter of giving out the testimony, and God's going to do the rest. That's what happened with Pharaoh. Pharaoh, God finally said, you've seen enough. I've done enough right in front of your eyes. All the miracles he did, he was knocking down the Egyptian gods, all of them. That's what he was doing. But he finally came to the point and said, okay. That scares me. That scares me a lot, that there comes to that point where somebody can just refuse it so often. That, I mean, God knows the outcome. He knows what's going to happen. But it comes to the point where God says, okay, I'm not going to force you to do anything. God's a gentleman. It's our choice, right? It's our choice to where we're going. God's a gentleman. He's not going to force anybody to be with him. And I think once you get into somebody that's that arrogant and argumentative at that point, it's up to you. God's not going to force you someplace you don't want to go.
Yeah, I think this gets back to this warm and cold thing. I mean, vigorously refuting. I don't see that around the kitchen table. Maybe rarely. Where I see this is where maybe I'm in a street in a street ministry situation, and somebody is coming up with something that is, I know, is 180 degrees diametrically opposed from Scripture, and they're being vocal about it, and other people are listening. You know, am I gonna take the courageous tact and vigorously refute? Maybe not even for that person's benefit, but for people that are hearing. I'm sure that's happened to you out there, where people are overhearing these conversations. And I think setting the record straight in certain situations is just hugely important.
I think so too. We've been through a few of these. What do you guys think? You got questions so far? Instead of us going to the next few, have you got any of them that sparked something you might want to ask? Yeah, Lance.
What I was thinking, listening to all of this, is that it has to be a point where you put it together and do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
One time, I was with Anastasis, a mercy ship, and we were in Jamaica, and Friday night in this little town, Port Antonio, it was Friday and everybody was out there. Buses were coming in with big banana things on top and stuff. And here these little churches around there. It was a Methodist, Salvation Army, and so they were gonna hold an outreach in the middle of all this. So they have one guitar amp and a bass with not enough strings. And so I told him I'd come over there, so I did. So the pastor said, we'll let you know when to do this. And so they talked to each a little bit. And so I was thinking, what am I gonna say? I'm gonna say this, and I said, I'm gonna blank my mind and see what happens. And it worked. One of the ship's people were out in the audience, and they said people were listening.
It's good, yeah.
Yeah.
It's excellent opportunity. Yeah. Anybody else?
When you said, when you brought up the Mormon, what if you're talking to a Mormon, it kind of struck a chord with, my husband and I were on a cruise ship, and since COVID, we usually all sit at a round table, big table stuff, but since COVID, they do it differently now, more individually. And we shared a table with a Mormon mother and daughter. Mother was probably in her 90s or 80s, and the daughter about like in her 50s. And so we were all very positive, upbeat about the Lord, and four of us. And my husband said, "Do you mind if I say a prayer before we get started on our meal?" And they're like, "No, that would be wonderful." So, and one of them made the comment, I can't remember if it's the mom or the daughter, we're pretty much the same, and both Doug and I know, no, you're lost, and so he prayed for the meal. We continued to have wonderful, intimate kind of conversation,
Yeah.
and in my head, I'm just like, Lord, what do I say? Give me the words, where can I go with this? Because I know I'm gonna step away from these people.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would be the only one that would be sharing the Lord with them, but, anyway, I think we might have said something like about, Jesus, being our Savior. I don't remember because I was like, Lord, Holy Spirit, please help me. So, but when you said that, and I was thinking, yeah, I could just kind of like, yeah, we believe, and then just go into the gospel,
Yes.
that would give me an opportunity to kind of address it that way, so, but I always think of these things later.
Me too. But I think you said something very important, is to pray to God between the words. Because he said that we'll give them to us. If that comes to that point where you're gonna be in front of them, and they're gonna be throwing these questions at you, don't worry about it. Because I'm gonna give you the words. And yeah, you're right, that's, you know, that concern, because they're Mormons and, you know, they feel they're okay
With their good works
with
and,
their good works and all the rest of the stuff they do, but
yeah, they did amazing things. I was just stunned of what this one woman, the daughter had done through her life with education and different.
you can't
things
fault them
like
for being with family, for sure,
No.
cause they love that.
Mhm.
But there's lots of people that are, you know, there's
Yeah.
probably some atheists that live their life better than I do now, but that doesn't matter, does it?
No, and I think you're hit on a good point with the works thing. I mean, maybe the verses, Ephesians 2:8 and 9, right, that we're saved by faith. It's a gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. That's either true or it's not. It's back to one of these very binary things in the Bible. And I think that applies to all religions.
It does.
All religions are works-based.
Mhm.
That's why they're religion.
Do you find it more difficult to witness or discuss with an atheist or a cultic person?
I'm gonna say, more difficult or easier?
Whichever one you want to go.
I think, personally, in my experience, I think it's more difficult with people that have some religious background. I really do.
Me
Why
too.
do you think so? What do you think that
Well,
is?
because they've been locked into a theology in a way that just, they filter it through that. I think that a lot of purported atheists, first of all, I don't even believe there's real atheists, but I guess that's another point. I think that, in my experience, atheists or purported atheists are more open to the possibility of God. I think you can use a moral argument with an atheist that you can't really get to with a cult person because they've got their morals. But it's an individual thing. That's not to say, you know, give up on them, but, you know, I'm dealing with a lot of people right now where my mother lives. There's a lot of Jewish widows, and these Jewish ladies, boy, they hear the word Bible or Bible study and they just run. So I think part of it is just getting them engaged, Dirk. I think if you can get them engaged, that's great. And if you can actually have a conversation, I think that's fantastic. I think that if a religious person is not satisfied with their religious experience, there's a definite door open there.
Yeah, when I first started in the ministry, I thought, go to atheists. Why? Where in the Bible does it anything about that? But actually, in the book of Revelation, God was talking to the churches, and he said to Laodicea in particular, he said, I would rather you be hot or cold. But the fact that you're lukewarm, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. And I took that to mean that, you know, he likes the hot ones. That's ones that he considers to be on fire for God. And he likes the ones that, you know, I don't know anything about God and I don't want to know. I think what I took it as, and maybe I don't have any theology like that, what I took that as is that the ones that are cold, that's atheists. Ones that are lukewarm, those are the ones that, maybe they tell you, well, I am a Christian. You know, my grandfather was a Christian, therefore I'm a Christian.
Yeah, and I think
How do you go from there? You say, well, I'm not talking about your grandfather, I'm talking about you. Well, where are you at? And maybe you can get them to turn around.
right.
Or like you're doing, talking to a Mormon. Well, I know who God is. I love Jesus. And then you have to, okay, but who's this Jesus that you love? What's the deal? Did he ever tell you that you had to go in 3 months into the mission field to be able to be in heaven? Or that you have to marry the right person to be in heaven? Did Jesus say anything about like that? So it seems like you have a different gospel than we do.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the 4 Gospels, because there's a lot of Christians that have not read the 4 Gospels. I think a great approach is, have you read the Gospels? You know, and so that's a very simple way, especially if you've got a New Testament or something you can give them. Because it doesn't back it up.
Yeah.
But this, they have to understand that their works aren't good enough. And I don't think you come to that with necessarily an atheist, although I think atheists kind of hedge their bets that way. Well, I'm a good person, you know.
If
But
there
the-
is one, then I'll get there because of that. yeah.
But the religious person that's got pride in their religion, if they figure they've already got it knocked with God.
Well, we're kind of bumping up against 11:30, guys, so we kind of did promise to get you out of here by then.
You wanna talk about next month?
Yeah. Next month, this was kind of introduction for us, we kind of going over what we're gonna do, where we're gonna go. So what we're gonna start off with is, does truth exist? And that's a broad subject. You know, truth with the Gospels, when they were written, who they were written by, do we have any reasonable level that we can assure ourselves that they were written by the people that actually said they wrote them? Why did we leave the ones that are the Apocrypha out, and the ones like the Gospel of Thomas, why was that left out? I think that all falls into truth, and for that matter, the idea behind there wasn't a creator, which is very popular in our society right now. Academia, the large part of academia, with maybe the exception of the Christian colleges, and some of them even fall into it, is that true? Can it be demonstrated to be true? So that's a broad topic of truth. We're probably gonna be on that for the next, 3 months or so.
Right.
Yeah, and then we'll get into some other stuff, but again, I gave cards, and if you need more, there's up there. So you guys have questions, you have ones that you'd like to hear what's what about?
Or suggestions?
Yeah, and it would be good if you gave it to us early, because we might have a question, we have no idea what it is, we can find out, right? So.
Do we wanna key it into the cold case Christianity?
Yeah, and the book, yeah, if you guys wanna start reading on the book,
So we may go through some topics in the first few chapters then,
yeah,
first 5 or so chapters maybe.
right.
That way
Anyway,
we got a structure, keep
Okay,
the
try to keep the
structure.
structure like this.
But even if something's not in the first 5 chapters and it's on your heart, please let us know.
Yeah,
On the commercial for this study, it's those two kids talking and, why does God allow bad things to happen to good people?
Right.
And I deal with a lot of people that are like that. One person I've been talking to for years, it's a National Geographic, and it's a black woman. And she's like skin and bones, and she's holding a baby that's skin and bones, probably dead. I can't remember the picture. It was years ago. So he says, why does God let that happen? And then why did God let this happen to my son? Or why did, or this to my daughter? And so I get a lot of people that say that if God is so good. So maybe some verses, I do look up that kind of stuff, but maybe,
Okay, that's
know,
good, that's
something in
and you're right, that does come up an awful
in
lot.
that
it
area.
is, man.
Yeah,
It's one of the
and
ones
there
you-
are good answers for that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we can do that.
I'm not real good.
One that pops into mind right away is that we were just covering this, I have a Bible study in the house. We were just covering this, a week or two ago? It was talking about who it is who's the God of this world.
That was before the Christmas break.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but they're talking about the God of this world, and they're not talking about Jesus.
Yeah.
Me personally, I believe there was election held in Genesis chapter 3. I believe there was an election held there. And unfortunately, there was only 2 votes. Satan got them both. And from then on, God said,
That's awesome.
we don't have the Garden of Eden anymore. You guys are out of the Garden of Eden because you've now sinned, and I don't want you to live forever in your sin. So when I get asked that, and it's a very good question. I personally think that's the best argument atheists have. I think that's the best one. Particularly if it's not great, but it's the one they got. And that's why I try to explain this. So, well, God made a perfect world for us, but He gave us a choice. Because with love, if that's what God's aiming at, is for a love relationship with you, then you gotta have a choice, right? This is my wife. When I got married, I wanted her to want to marry me. I didn't want to have a gun next to her head to make her do it, right? I wanted her to want to do it because she loved me. And the same with her, I'm sure. That's what God is like. He wants a love relationship. If you have a love relationship, you gotta have a choice. And there's lots of people, like the people that flew airplanes into the World Trade Center. There's people that make bad choices, and unfortunately it affects other people in that situation. But God gave us the ability to choose. We can choose to love him and try to follow him, or we can choose to reject him and say, I'm gonna do my own way. I think that's a lot of what we see, but that's a really good question. That's a biblical one, because people think, well, God made things perfect. No, actually, that's not what Genesis says. He said he made it perfect at one point, but since then, I think we can all see that it's not so perfect anymore.
Well, maybe we'll tack that one on to whatever else we're covering.
Yeah, we can
next
certainly,
month.
let's
Do that.
let's get into that a little bit.
Okay, good.
All right,
All right.
you wanna close us out, Dirk?